I feel very fortunate at the NAM to be able to work very closely with about 275 different sectoral associations, and we work toward our mutual policy goals. So this is a really important and timely discussion, and we have great panelists. So let me bring them on stage. First, we have Bill Long. He is the president and CEO of MEMA. That's the Vehicle Suppliers Association. We have Jennifer Safavian. She's the president and CEO of Auto Drives America. And Cody Lusk. Cody is the president and CEO of the American International Auto Dealers Association. So this is an important and timely panel because there's not much going on in policy these days, is there? And by the time we finish this panel in about 40 minutes, there'll probably be about 5 different additional executive orders that we'll have missed and we'll need to unpack. So let's dive in. Really excited to be able to moderate this panel. Thank you for the opportunity. Well, so President Trump and this White House are off to a fast start working with a new Congress. So question to start, framing question for all of you. We have a moment in time where trade policy and policy affecting automotive is fast evolving. So what do your members broadly see as the main opportunities and challenges in the weeks and months ahead? Are there policy and legislative priorities that they hope that policymakers, both at the federal and at the state level, might work on this year?
Bill,
you want to go first?
Andrea, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here. You know, what we hear from members, supplier members, falls into 2 themes. One would be the challenge for global manufacturing competitiveness, or maybe to restate it, manufacturing competitiveness for the U.S. globally. Certainly a fair amount of challenges in that area. And the other area that we hear from members is surrounding the uncertainty associated with the broad range of possibilities and maybe challenges or headwinds that the industry is facing right now. And you're right, suppliers have gone through, maybe persevered would be the better response, of challenges over the past 5 or 6 years with worker shortage, the race for technology transformation, et cetera. And MEMA just recently finalized a study on the impact of the supplier community and jobs and the economic impact. And it's interesting to note that even with the headwinds that the industry has faced, the supplier community in particular, supplier jobs have grown since pre-COVID levels. And when you think of it, all the challenges that the automotive industry has faced, supplier job growth is pretty amazing. And maybe just for the record, supplier sector, those companies that manufacture parts and components, represent the largest sector of manufacturing jobs in the US. So a pretty significant impact on the US economy. As far as issues and concerns that are on the minds of suppliers, what we're hearing, there's a fair amount of optimism for 2025, but suppliers certainly highlight the challenges with tariffs and also the review for USMCA in 2026. So that's kind of the overarching mood of the supplier community.
Great. So I'll go next. For the automotive industry, for the international automakers who are my members, I would say I think that there is some when you say opportunities, for instance, I think that there's a lot of opportunities with regard to President Trump talks a lot about trying to increase investment in manufacturing in the U.S. And so for my members who do produce over half of the vehicles made in the United States today, that's really important for them. And so I think things like deregulation, other type of, where they talk about some tax policies perhaps that will be encouraging manufacturing. My members have already invested $109 billion in the United States, and they continue every year to invest more. So I think anything that helps that environment is an opportunity for my members to continue to produce more cars here, employ more American workers, which is exactly what their focus is on. There's also things mentioned like permitting reform, which is also would be something very beneficial for my members as well. So I think that there are definitely some opportunities, and we'll see how that plays out. And I'll just piggyback a little bit on what Bill said as far as some of the challenges. Certainly, the threat of tariffs is definitely concerning. Anything that gives uncertainty to business is really hard for businesses, for automakers in particular, to plan their next product or how long it'll take or how they'll do it. So anything like that is pretty disruptive. And of course, USMCA, which I'm sure we'll talk more in detail about later, is also something that's very much on our mind, and we'll get into more details about that.
Well, since you've heard from a former retailer, a current retailer, and now me, I will say dealers are extraordinarily optimistic about 2025. Consumer sentiment's high, interest rates have leveled off, and we were hoping maybe they would cut them last week. They didn't, but I think the business climate seems very strong. We've got great product. Look at this beautiful vehicle sitting behind you there. And so dealers are excited to get customers what they want, and that's sort of the theme of the day that I think you've heard. Our industry, or our side of the industry, wants the government to get out of the way and let customers buy what they want to buy. And we're happy to provide them with what they want to buy without trying to force something down their throats that they don't want. And again, that's something that's been the forefront of all these discussions that we've been having. As it relates to tariff, I think you'll find a much different sentiment probably amongst all of us today than we might have had 8 years ago, in that there's a level of anxiety, but it's not what it was maybe back then. We went through most of the first Trump administration with the threat of 25% tariffs across the whole industry, and that never happened. And I'm not saying what will or won't happen as it relates to Canada and Mexico, but I think there's a level of dealers want to focus on what they can focus on, and that is selling cars, and we'll figure out what happens policy-wise and adjust to that if it happens. So, thanks.
Okay, well, that's a good segue. Bill referenced some of the supply chain challenges over the recent years, the recovery from pandemic, global challenges, sort of geopolitical challenges. And, as you said, Cody, we've had various forms of tariffs in place for nearly 8 years. They began under the first Trump administration, they continued under the Biden administration, and even expanded. And on the first day of office, President Trump issued a memorandum, the America First trade policy. And in that memo, he directed federal agencies, the economic agencies, to conduct various studies on different trade issues, trade deficits, whether we have reciprocity in trade agreements, the impact of the USMCA on the United States, and even to report on the flows of illegal migration and fentanyl coming across the border from Canada and Mexico. Those reports are due on April 1, and they could lead to various remedies, including more tariffs. So, Cody, as you said, we're waiting to see what happens, but it could be that it's January 30. On February 1, we might see the threat or the imposition of a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, and possibly 10% on China. So my question to each of you is that, while the industry has been able to weather the tariffs so far, how would any additional tariffs or threat of additional tariffs impact your segment of the auto industry? Maybe Bill, we start with the suppliers.
Okay.
Parts,
Why
and then
not?
builders and sellers. How about that?
Exactly. So it's no surprise that the supplier community has been right in the crosshairs, if you will, the epicenter of tariffs for the past 7 years or so. And Cody referenced the 25% tariffs and things that didn't happen, but we all lobbied for a strategic approach, a surgical approach to tariffs to address the issues versus a across-the-board broad impact. As we look at suppliers navigating the landscape, they've had to do quite a lot, not only shouldering the cost and an impact of those tariffs, the impact on margin and profitability, but also trying to navigate the web of new vendor or input approvals from their customers. So that's all been very challenging. Today, right now, even the threat of tariffs has the potential to be almost catastrophic, probably a strong word, but many of our members have said that if tariffs were imposed on Canada and Mexico, it would shut down vehicle production because it only takes one supplier to shut down an entire production line for OE production, and that shutdown impacts all suppliers. So there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty right now on making investments, on decisions for technology models and what have you. So I would just say there's a lot of nervousness and fragility over the potential threat, and if it became real, it will have it will make a dent.
Yeah, let me follow up on that. I agree. Certainly when we talk about Mexico and Canada, if we just speak about that potential threat with February 1st looming 2 days from now, first of all, Mexico and Canada are our closest allies. They're our largest trading partners. The U.S. And Canada and Mexico, we import and export hundreds of billions of goods and services every year. So it's critically important. And for the auto industry, it's even more important. We have such an integrated supply chain. It can't be done, right? You can't do it alone. It's just all three are critically important to the U.S. auto industry. So if there is a tariff on Canada and Mexico, it would have certainly a significant impact on the auto industry. As Bill was saying, certainly if something happens to one of our suppliers, that prevents the OEMs from producing in the United States, right? And we produce a lot of vehicles here. And keep in mind that, and while the devil will be in the details if this were to happen, the goods can cross the border multiple times before they end up in the U.S. Economy. So who knows what that might look like? And for the auto industry, cars go back and forth across the border 7 times perhaps, right, before they are finished product. So it could have a significant impact on the U.S. auto industry and the production of vehicles. On top of that, I would say, the other thing that concerns us with tariffs is, of course, retaliation. The threat of retaliation, or actually retaliation by some of the countries who get tariffed. Because what that means is perhaps U.S. produced vehicles, right, they get tariffed, become more expensive. In other countries, we can't sell those vehicles. That in turn, of course, impacts American jobs. And the more American exports we have, the more American jobs we have. And I think that that's just critically important to remember. So when we talk about this, we have to look at the whole big picture and the impact it would have. For my members, in 2023, they exported 760,000 American-made vehicles to 130 plus countries. We only want to see that grow. We don't want to see that decline. So I think that that's important to keep that in mind. And also, so I think, certainly, that's an important piece when you talk about Mexico and Canada, and universal tariffs, right, if that were to come into play. So I think to us, it's just increased costs, and certainly the uncertainty has a significant impact as well.
Okay, so we saw concern about cost increase at the supplier level, at the OEM level. How does that flow through?
I think we know who's going to pay that, right? If costs go up on the inputs and the manufacturing process, those get passed on to the consumer. If you're able to do it, they may choose. It may be that it's not even worth importing that vehicle. If you look at, there's a 25% tariff on imported pickup trucks, and without USMCA in place, tell me how many pickups get imported into the U.S. There aren't any because it's so prohibitive. So I mentioned that my members aren't concerned right now, but they could get concerned very quickly because the biggest issue, or one of the biggest issues that's been impacting us for the last few years, is affordability. And the average vehicle price now, transaction price, is approaching $50,000. Your average monthly payment is $700. So you add possibly $10,000 to a car, being imported or from wherever the tariffs hit, it's a big deal. And we worry that that could tip the scale when we're starting to see that slide back a little bit. And if consumers can't buy what they want, it doesn't do any of us any good. And so that is really what worries us, is this tips the affordability scale back out of favor with the customer. And we hope that this, as it relates to Canada and Mexico, that we can urge those people to come to the table to reach a solution, a negotiated solution, before it ever gets to this. So I've talked to my counterparts in Canada, encouraged them to do whatever they need to do to get this off the table, because it could get serious, and it could get serious in a hurry.
Great. And of course, components don't arrive out of thin air. They require a lot of raw material and inputs to get to that stage where there could be a tariff, and energy tariffs. So there's really a very complex landscape here. So you've all talked about the integrated nature of North American automotive production. So this would be a good segue to talk about the review of the US-Canada-Mexico agreement. So under the agreement, there's a built-in 6-year review that is scheduled to take place in July 2026. It doesn't mean it can't take place sooner. And in fact, one component of the memo, the presidential memo, instructs the U.S. Trade Representative to initiate the process of consultation around that review. So that could begin as soon as April of this year. And we know that one central feature of the USMCA and the backbone of automotive trade, it's built on rules of origin. So the reason that you can move the components and continue to finish the car and get to that stage across the border so many times is because of the agreement itself. So I want to ask you a few questions around what you expect in terms of changes to automotive rules of origin. What do you think is in the offing? So we've got a negotiation among 3 countries, as Cody pointed out. What do you think the impact would be to the auto industry if those rules are made stricter? And what would you like to see in those negotiations or the review?
Do you want to start or do you want me to start?
I'll defer to my counterparts on that one. They've got it all figured out.
It's a great question, for sure. From the supplier standpoint, we would point out that USMCA is still relatively new. That all of us are still trying to adjust and meet the requirements that have been set and agreed upon. And even during President Trump's first term, he helped guide and support USMCA, and MEMA had a clear seat at the table to help educate the administration on the benefits and impact and help set some of the language and the guidelines for rule of origin. We would also point out that the commercial vehicle rule of origin also doesn't get reviewed till 2027. So they're still trying to go and implement and make the necessary adjustments. And right now, I think many of you know, everyone in this panel knows that the USMCA has the strongest requirements for achieving tax-free status with the rule of origins already today. So we are sticking to a review versus a renegotiation and focusing on that outcome, and then doing everything that we can to highlight the benefits and North American competitive advantage that comes with that relationship.
Yeah, I'll just work off of that. I completely agree with what Bill was saying. There's no question the content requirements of USMCA are the strongest, I think, of any agreement out there. And it has only been about 4.5 years since it entered into force. And don't forget, when it first entered into force, we were in the middle of a pandemic. So there hasn't been a lot of time for us to even fully meet the requirements. A lot of the automakers, had to get additional time in their alternative staging regimes just to meet the requirements. And some have met them, some still need more time. So we're still very much, I think, working through this agreement as it is right now. A significant amount of investment has been made by the OEMs, both in the U.S. and in North America, to comply with the agreement, which is a benefit. There's no question about that. It's a positive. And they are working towards meeting those requirements. So your question of, what would happen if it became stricter, right? Again, we already feel that it is very strict. And the concern with making it stricter before we've even been able to comply with like the first requirements of it would only make things more expensive and would take more time, I think, at the end of the day. So, we too find USMCA to be important. And it is very beneficial, I think, for the North American region to stay globally competitive. And so we definitely want to make sure that the integrity of the agreement is maintained. You're right. I think President Trump is looking to begin the review or renegotiation, whatever they want to call it, sooner than next year. So I think we're going to all be very actively working on it within the next couple of months as everyone starts to kind of, each three countries, I think, start having discussions about it. But it's an important agreement.
And how will the shift to electrification, the uptick of electrification, and also the emergence of new automotive technologies affect the review? And in addition to that, there's been a bit of discussion about concern about the level of Chinese investment in the automotive industry in Mexico in particular. To what degree do you think that will feature in the review?
Yeah. So I do think when it comes to the advanced technologies, I do think that that'll be a big part of the review. And I think from the OEM's perspective, I think we're looking for flexibilities because technologies continuously advance and they change. And it's impossible to predict what's going to happen over the next few years. So I think the flexibility is important for us to be able to continue to advance technologies and still meet the requirements. With regard to the China component of it, I think you've heard a lot from policymakers already openly talking about how that's going to be a significant part of this review. And I think there's a lot of concern by policymakers about Mexico being what they call, I think, a backdoor to Chinese EVs coming into the United States or other Chinese content that they have looked for other ways to prevent from being in the United States. And so I think that will be a significant part of the discussions with Mexico. I think Mexico has already started talking to policymakers about Chinese investment in their country and what they're doing about that. And so I think that that's important that they're educating, I think, the Congress and the new administration about that. But I think it will be a significant part of this negotiation.
Well, before I leave trade policy, I just want to give you an opportunity to also sort of make the pitch for where there are new opportunities, because part of that memorandum suggested that the administration is looking for new market access opportunities. So what would be some of the automotive industry's priorities in that regard?
Okay, so yes, I agree with that, and I think that was positive. Certainly for the OEMs, we, as I mentioned earlier, we are looking to build more American cars to export to more markets. So market access is critically important to us. The President Trump seems to favor bilateral trade agreements, so I think that there could be opportunities out there in his administration for a trade agreement with the UK, maybe even with the EU, Japan. We don't have one with Japan, so that would be really important. So, we would certainly be in favor of those negotiations, more market access. Also, I think harmonization of standards would be really important for us. Critical mineral agreements, more of those. There's one with Japan right now, and I think if we could have more of those, that would be very helpful for us going forward as well. So I think that there are opportunities, and I agree. I think that memo the memorandum that he put out, I think opened the door to some of that. So that would be very helpful.
And we would second that.
Okay, great. Okay, let me bring Cody back into the conversation and widen this out a little bit. So I want to ask a broader tax question, but let me just start with the Inflation Reduction Act, which included consumer credits for electric vehicles. It's received a lot of attention by President Trump and by Republicans in Congress who are who are looking at who will look at the IRA. They will consider what it is they like, what they don't like, and they're talking about getting rid of the credits potentially to pay for tax cuts, tax breaks that they're looking to put into a reconciliation package. So what is your perspective about that? Would the loss of the credits impact dealers who are trying to sell EVs?
Well, I think the message has been delivered loud and clear by the president, by Republicans in Congress, by Senator Moreno early today that they're going to do away with that. And it is too much of a pay for them to ignore. I think if you look at what we would like to see, a lot of dealers took EVs, put them on their lot. Maybe they got them from a discount from the manufacturer. But if you do need an EV, you can go to any dealer lot and find one. And I say that because we'd rather not see this cliff where it ends. Maybe there's a phase out. Maybe it phases out automatically, given the timeline of what the reconciliation is going to be. But I think that at least from a federal perspective, those are going to go away. Now there are specific ones that are available in various states across the country, so they're still going to have those. But I'm not, again, the president has spoken about this loud and clear, so has the Senate, so has all the Republican members of Congress, so that's going to go away.
Well, okay, so and I believe that you had sort of record automotive sales this year, and what is it going to take what policies do you want to see to keep that trend going?
Well, I think to keep the government out of the auto business first and foremost, and it's not hard. It's not rocket science. I think you had Bernie Moreno, again, the guy was a very successful, Mercedes-Benz dealer and has really had his nose to the ground. You've got guys like Jamie Darvish sitting over here. These people know how to sell cars. But it isn't just they know how to sell cars. They give customers what they want. And the days of you can just sell a customer never to see them again, that's not the business model. The business model is I have to have a customer for life. So I've got to get you in to buy my Toyota Highlander because I want to have you come in 6 months to service it. I want to have you bring it in another 6 months. I want to see you and your children for the next 16 years because that's what this business is based on. So I think the model has evolved in a positive way. We spend an inordinate amount of money and investment in technology. You talked about the ASOTU guys that were here earlier. We do a similar thing. We invite members of Congress to come to dealerships so they can walk around and actually see the technology that is in the stores. And the technology is all designed, a lot of it, to do one thing: make the customer experience better. And that's something we have to do better as an industry as a whole that you heard Mr. Castriota talk about earlier. But it's going to be, we had a great 2024. It's going to be a fantastic 2025. And that's how we think. We think in 30-day cycles, and we give people what they want. And if, when people interfere or make it harder to do that, it negatively impacts everyone.
Okay, I want to broaden it out to other policies that would unlock more expanded manufacturing and growth. And Jennifer, you briefly touched on tax policy. So there are a number of tax credits that would otherwise expire at the end of this year. You talked a little bit about permitting and regulation. So and then Bill, you touched a little bit on workforce development. So I'm interested in your thoughts about what kind of policies do you want to see that would help fuel more expanded manufacturing and growth?
I'll build on what Cody said and focusing on the customer experience and technology and innovation. Suppliers have invested billions. I think the number that you shared, it's probably greater, but a lot in R&D and technology. But yet the R&D tax amortization is a barrier for U.S. manufacturing competitiveness, especially when competing with China that provides subsidies. Right now, previously, manufacturers were able to, as everyone in the room knows, amortize those costs in a single year. And that tax amortization was changed to over 5 years and puts us in a very uncompetitive position for investments that drive the industry. And in a lot of cases, suppliers are the ones that are creating the catalyst for innovation and technology in partnership with car manufacturers. And that would be number one on our radar to help stimulate growth and competitiveness.
I would agree with that. Immediate expensive R&D is critically important for the OEMs as well. You know, for international automakers, you know, they employ about 8,000 Americans. They have like 79 R&D facilities here in the United States, so it's really important for them as well, and to continue with the advanced technologies to make the U.S. auto industry globally competitive and to keep us that way. So that would be one of them. The other thing I would mention is, you know, bonus depreciation would be something as well that we would like to see renewed. You know, that allows us to, you know, reinvest in plant upgrades, right, machinery, things like that that are critically important. So I would say that those are two of the prime things that we were focused on. And then generally, like you said, I think just any other policies that would help promote U.S. manufacturing is something that we support as well.
Yeah, and I think one thing that gets my spidey sense tingling a little bit is, what are the pay-fors? How are we going to pay for these tax cuts? I think all of us want them to be renewed, and everybody has a little thing they want to do, but I worry in this climate, do we see the return of things like the border adjustment tax, things like that? I mean, remember, tariffs may replace the whole income tax at some point. So I'm worried about what in this environment do we come through that would be a pay-for that might negatively impact the industry as well.
Okay, so there's opportunity, but there's also some peril. So I wanted to have Bill, maybe you touched on workforce. I'm interested to know how we go about addressing, you know, the workforce challenge, the shortfalls really in filling open jobs. You know, across the manufacturing sector, there are probably some 480,000 jobs that are yet unfilled. And if we're successful in expanding manufacturing through these policies, by 2030, there could be over 3 million jobs that are not filled. So what are the challenges each of you see in your segment of the industry, and what are some of the solutions to overcome that?
Well, it certainly is topical. Suppliers, I think, have done an admirable job in reacting to and adjusting to some of the workforce shortages, and the investments that would help the industry certainly are around support for training and retraining. You know, we've gone through this transformation from internal combustion engines to electrification or electrified. And interestingly enough, I mentioned the increase in jobs since 2019 based on the recent economic impact. In a lot of those job growth areas are in the areas of new technology. And the things that we look for or promote are investments that would help in that retraining. That is the biggest need that we hear, and suppliers are doing a lot on their own, of course. They're working with universities and VOTEC schools and internships and so forth. There's a lot of creative things that are happening. But to support any subsidies or investments, incentives in the area of retraining is number one on the list.
Very much the same for the OEMs. You know, workforce is critically important. You know, my international automakers employ over 100,000 workers in their production facilities, right? And so they recognize early on the importance of not only training, continual training, retraining, upskilling their workforce for new technologies that are coming down the pipe, but also for schooling those younger, right? I mean, my members do programs with high schools, with even middle schools, to introduce students to that there are other opportunities out there, you know, besides necessarily just a 4-year college degree. And they do that through, you know, hands-on experiences, donating vehicles to universities and technology centers so they can actually get hands-on and break down a car and rebuild it. So exciting things like that. And I think, you know, given, and making sure they understand that it's very focused on technology, right? Cars are really cool. You know that just by looking at them, but inside there's so much technology in them, and I think that a lot of younger people don't quite understand that. And so I think it's the opportunities to show them that. And they do that through apprenticeships, right? They do that through, having them pay for additional education while they're working. There's a lot of opportunities that my members provide to get people in the jobs and build careers out of them is really what's most important, I think. This is not a one-time job. They want them to stay with them for many, many years, build a career out of it that helps their families, helps their communities. And so I think some policies that would be helpful on that is, more on the apprenticeship side of things, working more closely with businesses to see what works, right? And coordinating with them and with local universities to see what businesses need in order to prepare students for these jobs. And also, I think Pell Grant, there was some discussion last Congress about allowing Pell Grants to be used for some of this education stuff. So I think that there are some opportunities for Congress to help in this regard with the workforce.
Yeah, and I think if you poll dealers, the biggest headache they have are finding good people. And it's a great career path that not a lot of people know about. I'll credit our handsome host, John O'Donnell, over there. And AIADA has spent a lot of the proceeds of this show over the years to focus on training for technicians, to find workers, to fill roles, from going to schools and doing a lot of effort across cities and states across this country, because the auto industry is a fantastic industry where you can work your way up from the bottom and achieve great success if you're willing to work hard, and not a lot of people know about that career path. And so guys like John and other counterparts are spending a lot of resources, a lot of time trying to make that happen, along with the dealer partners across the country as well.
I need a shameless plug. I'm sorry about this. I'm interrupting. Our program is called ADEI, Automotive Dealer Educational Institute, and the dealers are so desperate for this skill set that we pay for the students' education. It's a learn while you earn program. They're in the dealership with a mentor 4 days a week. The 5th day, they go to the local community college. Assuming they pass the ASE certification test, they have a guaranteed job. One more time, guaranteed job. We were just down on Capitol Hill with Debbie Dingle and Marcy Capter. Our nation needs to reinvest in programs like this. We did away with them in the 80s. Now we find ourselves scratching our heads saying, gee, where'd everybody go? How come I don't have any qualified technicians? And the federal government and the state governments and the local community governments are now turning to associations like ours for guidance to stand up programs. We know it's a problem, but they don't know how to fix the problem, and they're turning to folks like us. Can you help us identify an instructor? Can you help us determine a curriculum? Where do we go to find the students? So this is a big issue. Sorry to interrupt.
See, I told you he was doing great stuff.
It was fantastic, absolutely. So I grew up in Detroit in the 80s, and I wanted to go into trade policy because of the negotiations between the U.S. and Japan in the 1980s. I don't know how I made a career out of policy for 30 years. So much admiration for people with technical skills, so I'm glad that we covered this ground because it's vitally important for the growth of the industry. We are almost out of time. I just want to give you all an opportunity for whatever parting thoughts that you might have, what policies are top of mind, priority, where do you want to end the conversation? I'll leave that to you.
I think we covered a lot, and I would say that I think, certainly for the automakers, international automakers, they are excited about continuing to invest more here in the U.S. They are building more plants, opening new facilities, providing new models out there for consumers. I mean, as Cody mentioned earlier, it's about consumer choice, right? And making sure that they produce the vehicles that consumers want, that they need for their business, for their families, right? And they provide a lot of different options for them. We want to make sure sure that that continues. And I just see continued growth in their future, which is really important. And so I do think that there's an opportunity for this new administration and for Congress, and a lot of the things that they're talking about, the policies they're talking about, and making sure that they are pro-growth, right? And they are continuing to move us forward in that direction, because that is something that international automakers are very much looking to do and continue to do. And so I think having the support in the administration and Congress will be very helpful in that regard.
I'll just maybe end where I began, and that is in the area of focus on U.S. manufacturing competitiveness globally. And the industry really needs, both suppliers and all stakeholders in the industry need to identify the barriers to global competitiveness. Certainly tariffs, as I mentioned, might make exporters to the U.S. less competitive, but it doesn't make U.S. manufacturers more competitive globally. And we have an amazing technology and manufacturing base in the U.S. It's important for us to all focus on how we maintain and continue that leadership going forward. So that would be our focus and our platform. How do we work together with the administration to achieve a lot of the same goals that President Trump has outlined? So we are aligned with the end in mind. The question is the road to get there.
Cody, bring us home.
Well, not to get negative, but Congress has abdicated its policy responsibility for years now, and Congress has got to re-engage. When we were both on Capitol Hill, like with members on the Ways and Means Committee, they actually did things and actually worked together to advance things. And that there's been no trade policy for I don't know how many years now, and we have to get Congress re-engaged in this process. All the stakeholders, as Bill mentioned, engage in this process to move America where it deserves to be and where it needs to be. And as auto retailers, we're happy to do our part. If there's a market barrier anywhere, we will send delegation over there to talk about what needs to be done. If we're talking about lowering the EU tariff rate, we're happy to go talk to our counterparts that represent those brands to lower that down. We don't need to blast tariffs right out of the box. Let's have a negotiation. Let's sit down. Let's work with people to find a common solution that benefits Americans and American consumers.
Okay, well, for all of us and for all of the reporters out there, it is going to be a busy, very active year. We want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for our panelists for a really engaging conversation on the policy ahead. Stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you.